Hello and welcome to another episode of Current Call. I am Pedro, your host,
I am Hoyan, the other host.
and today we are going to be discussing the short story "A Jury of Her Peers" and the trial scene in the book "A Thousand Splendid Suns," and we're going to be comparing them.
Okay.
So the first question is, what parallels do you see between the short story and the trial scene?
Mhm.
Well, the most obvious one is that in both, men believed they were superior to
Yeah,
women,
yeah.
and men sort of ignore the fact that what women have to say is important.
Exactly.
So, yes, one example would be like, how when the young Talib says it takes two women to do a man's job, how why they have two women instead of one man is because, well, their brains don't work as well as men, and that's what they
Oh.
believe.
Oh, also, and then there's
Okay.
another one that men think like women aren't capable of like thinking and like stuff like detecting or stuff like that. Where it says like when men do not even try to relate with women and overlook everything, but only assuring that Minnie killed her husband with groundless thoughts. That it was just Minnie who was guilty, not even thinking about the side of the woman.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Like in a jury of her peers, the men just went to look for evidence, and although the women were finding really interesting things,
Yeah, yeah.
like of things left undone because it might have been that Minnie got mad or
Uh
something,
huh.
the men just overlooked it.
Yeah, they only thought it was just Minnie was guilty, not like they didn't even think about something else that maybe the man was guilty, but they never thought about it. Like they never even like be like maybe like never like.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
And then another parallel would be that both Miriam and Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters didn't agree with what the men
Uh
decided.
huh.
Well, Miriam, for example, she accepted the judgment of the Talibs, but it wasn't because she was agreeing with the men. I think it was more of more of her personal values that she wanted to protect Lila, and she knew she was responsible for a murder.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Well,
Like,
in the jury of her peers, they like literally do not agree with men, but it's like there's a parallel between
yeah,
like Mariam and them because they both don't agree with men, but like that these people, these women, Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters, they do not agree with them because they think like they think women are also like equal to men. They're not. There's nothing that woman is like inferior than men. Like they are like they have different reasonings of like going against what the men say, but they're literally saying that they both do not agree with men.
yeah, and they each have their own reasons
Uh huh.
because I feel like Miriam's reasons are more religious and personal
Uh huh.
values,
But like
and
they like Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters, they are more like gender, like generally
loyal to
like
their
woman.
uh, loyal to their
Yes,
gender.
exactly.
They understand. They went through Minnie's belongings and they understood that she had a really hard life.
Yeah.
And then they see the bird and they can instantly relate that she was childless and this probably brought her joy.
Yeah. It was like for Mariam it was personal and like Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters they were like general, like for a woman.
Yeah.
Hmm. Oh, okay.
And also, like, I don't know about you, but I saw a lot of parallels also between just Miriam and Minnie.
Okay.
How they both had like these really rough lives, and even though like they're both, well, Minnie was young and beautiful and all that, and they described that, and Miriam was just, well, she wasn't as bad as she was with Rashid, but as soon as they both got married to these strong and stubborn and serious men, their their enthusiasm for life which is killed little by little until they practically didn't look forward to anything and didn't really have any friends and just stayed isolated within their house.
Oh, that's so true. Like I totally agree.
And in the end, well, they both ended killing their husbands. Of course, I think Miriam's was more noble because she was protecting Layla, and I think Minnie's was more of an act of desperation because for years she had, you know, she had just like absorbed all the loneliness and all the bitterness and all the hatred towards her
Oh
husband.
yes.
And then when he finally killed that bird, I think she just cracked.
Oh yes, yeah. Like both of them were like living in the situation that other people or other men would thought their husband was like a nice person, like a nice gentleman. Like, but in the situation they were living, it wasn't true, and they had to just go through the situation that they were believed because they just couldn't speak out. So like the ultimate decision for what was it? Minnie was to kill her husband, like, and Mariam
Yeah.
was to protect her loved one.
But then again, I think like I do think Miriam's was more honorable.
Yes,
Minnie's, I think,
personal.
was just it was personal, but it was also more sad
Like more sad.
because yeah, because think about it. Minnie like actually had
Uh
nothing.
huh.
She just killed her husband out of complete, you know, anger, complete desperation because you she had finally cracked, and Miriam was fighting for something that, you know, she had an actual purpose.
Yes, that's so true. Well, I think that's.
And after,
Well, yeah, you go.
well, when they're both in jail, um, I think that's why Miriam was so peaceful. And well, we didn't really know how Minnie reacted, but given that that the women were gonna take her quilt and her apron to her to distract her, she was probably a little bit more nervous,
Yeah. Well.
or a lot more nervous.
Well. Yeah, there are a lot of parallels between them, but I think like these are the basic ones, like the most
Yeah.
common ones, and I think we can
Uh-huh.
wrap it up here.
All right.
So, the second question we received from our lovely viewers was, what are the male judges missing in their examination of Miriam? Well, there can be a lot of factors of this, but I personally think the generous one is that they're missing the true voice of the woman as general. So they do not believe her or even consider what she said as a way to think differently about her execution, saying it is under the law of Allah. So they're just executing her because she killed a man, but they do not even like try to think of other ways that why the reason she killed him or something. And also they do not see the true story, like just because it was a woman who did the crime. Like if it was a man, they would have thought it more seriously and maybe probably thinking another way, giving another penalty, you know, not just executing like that's it. And what do you think?
Well, I think uh, her being a woman does sort of influence that to a certain degree, but I don't think it just completely influenced it because, like, in truth, Miriam actually didn't have a witness. And I feel like the first judge was actually quite fair because he said to Miriam that she does not look like a wicked woman, just that she had committed a wicked action. And the second judge, the young judge who Miriam says, who they describe in the book, looked, you know, like he was crazy on his own power. He does start saying that men and women are different, and that men's brains are different than women's, and that women are not able to think like men, and that even Western doctors have proven this. And although Miriam says that, you know, she was protecting the other woman because he would have strangled her, they just dismiss that. And the main judge dismisses it because she has no witnesses, and the second one dismisses it just because she's a woman. So I do agree with you on that point to some certain degree. But what do you think? How do you think this relates to the other book? Because like what women had to say was also really dismissed by the men, even though it would have helped solve the trial.
Yeah, I think that's like the book, the other book, and this like Mariam's execution has a lot of like relationship. Like
Hmm.
in the book, the men didn't don't even consider what they say as an option. They think like they can't think like woman and like men. Like women can't think like men. So they're like, no, they can't. It can't be true. Like no. And then here it's also in the trial. The judges are like, no, she's a woman, and then she killed a man. Like they don't even see the true story. It could have been another way of ending, like not execution, maybe another penalty, and so that it doesn't change the whole life of Miriam. It just doesn't end the whole life of Miriam.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially in the short story, like I think what men do in both is that they just consider the women's perspective to be insignificant and trivial, and you can see that even when they walk through and they're talking about her quilt, if she's gonna knot it or not. They just laugh at them, even though that was a really big thing in the case because it showed that she was either nervous or mad or scared when she was quilting that quilt.
Like in the Mariam case, the truth can also actually be a really really big thing, on if they didn't think it was just something woman saying was just trivial. It could have been like a way to change the society, maybe, because she was doing the right thing. So I think that's like just being really sexist. I mean, yeah, yeah, she didn't have a witness, but yeah, it's very like sexist. The judges.
Well, she was doing the right thing protecting Layla, but in the end she did still kill a man. And of course she had no witnesses, so they didn't believe that she was protecting another woman, and they just saw it as murder, even though the main judge uh, did say that she looked like she was a kind woman. But I think all in all they were fair. Otherwise Miriam would have protested, but she knew that she had killed someone else, and she just quietly accepted their ruling.
So I don't know if this can satisfy the questions from our viewers.
All right. So that's it for this question.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Current Call. We would like to thank our sponsor, Audible. If you go to audible.com/current call podcast, you will get actually 2% off on your next book purchase. It's like 1/4 of a dollar, but it's still pretty worth it. All right. Thank you and good night.